Welcome to the Outliers podcast, celebrating the people, the skills, and the tools that create stories worth reading. A presentation of Outliers Writing University, where tomorrow's authors learn the craft.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Outliers YouTube channel and podcast series and our program, Get to Know. I'm your host, DP Lyle, and I'm here with my partner in crime, as usual, Kathleen Antrim.
Thanks, Doug. It is great to be here. And I'm really excited about this interview. We've got another bestseller for you. And he was also a police officer for many years. Patrick O'Donnell. We've got a great Irisher who, the Irish always know how to tell a great yarn. So
They do.
welcome to Get to Know.
Thank you so much for having me. This will be great.
So, as our viewers know, I like to dig in a little bit into the psyche and background of our writers. And I'd like to know how you feel your childhood might have contributed to you becoming a writer. Did you have imaginary friends? Were you an outgoing kid? Were you an introverted kid? Did you read a lot? Tell us about it.
I am the product of two Irish immigrants. I was born on the south side of Chicago. My parents, mom came over from Ireland when she was 12 or 13. Dad came over when he was 19. So it was a very strict Irish Catholic family. We went to Mass every Sunday. You went to confession every week. I went to Catholic grade school where it was I would say 50-50 between priests and nuns, teaching, and civilian teachers. It wasn't all nuns and priests, or mostly nuns. So again, you towed the line. I wore a uniform. There was a code of conduct that you had to abide by. There was no slacking. There was, it's nothing like what school is now. And, that's both good and bad. But I also had some really good teachers. I know nuns get a really bad rap, like the Blues Brothers, the Penguin and, all that kind of funny stuff. But I had some really, really good teachers that were nuns that cared so much about education and the kids and all that good stuff. And I also had a Chicago honey bear for a teacher. I don't know how she got into a Catholic school. That was one of the bears. That's what the Bears called their cheerleading squad, the honey bears. So she was a Chicago Bear cheerleader and a social studies teacher.
I bet you paid attention in that class.
Oh my God, a bunch of seventh grade boys. Are you kidding? It was like, oh, she's so good looking. Oh my gosh. So, very much the hard work ethic. There are no excuses for not trying. There are no excuses for not accomplishing things. And you go to work. I mean, my dad had to go to work when most of us are going to be a freshman in high school. He went to work in a slaughterhouse. It was third world country back then. No plumbing, no electricity. I remember I asked my dad one time, I said, what did you eat? He said, I remember asking my mom, I said, what's for dinner tonight? And she'd say, whatever you catch or kill. And I'm just like, wow, that's hardcore, man. That's okay. This is where my parents are coming from. So yeah. I remember I was 16 years old and my dad worked like a fiend. That whole immigrant work gene was crazy. With that work ethic is insane. And I never saw him. He was always at work. He gave his vacation time back to the company. I mean, here's my inspiration as a kid. Mom and dad both worked their butts off. And, here's dad. He comes to this country. His first job was in a dairy in downtown Chicago, washing glass milk bottles that were coming in wooden crates. That's how milk was delivered back then. And he wound up being the vice president of the company. Just let that sink in. But it was all, he's an incredibly intelligent man. Plus his work ethic was like bar none, just incredible. It was bananas. So it's my 16th birthday and dad is home and I'm like, holy cow.
When you were in Catholic school and you're going to class and obviously seeing the honey bear, did you read? Did you have imaginary friends? It sounds like you were an outgoing kid. You had lots of guy friends.
Music was my thing. I loved music. When I was at that age, I played baritone and alto saxophone. I was in jazz bands. I was in garage bands. I loved music. I absolutely loved it. And reading, no way. I was a terrible reader. I found out later I'm dyslexic. But back then, I remember one of the very bad teachers that wasn't a nun said, that pad is just stupid. I remember a parent-teacher conference, this teacher telling my mom, is like, Pat's really dumb. And I'm just like, I am sitting here. I am hearing this so much for uplifting children, but, different times. And, my outlet was music. I absolutely loved it. But, it was a different time in, the world where my brother and I, we get home from school and we would be out till, dinner time. We're playing softball. We're playing football. Our neighbor in the back set up a boxing ring. We'd beat the crap out of each other, boxing. It was just a different time, a different world. So as far as the writing stuff, that went much later that I got into writing. But, getting back to the work ethic, I'm 16. It's my birthday. I see Dad for the first time since I don't know how long because he's working all the time. He says, hop in the car. Let's go. And I'm like, this is going to be the best 16th birthday ever. He took me to every business in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. That's where we wound up. I was born in Chicago, but we moved to Wisconsin and got job applications. I'm 16 years old, and he's like, hey, you're a man now. You have to go to work. He's like, I'm not going to let you sit around the couch, watch TV, go play with your friends. He said, no, time for you to get a job and earn your keep.
So how did you transition to writing? How did you end up becoming a writer? Where did that switch happen?
That's the $1 million question. I did wind up going to college. I got kicked out twice. I was a horrible student, but I did graduate. And I wound up through a maze of different paths, wind up being a police officer, then a sergeant for the Milwaukee Police Department. And before that, after college, I was selling cars, I was bartending, I was managing a restaurant. And, I finally make it on the job, and I have people that's like, hey, could you come with me to buy this car? Because, I did it for 4 years. And I'm like, sure. Payment was a cigar, dinner, thank you, whatever. I didn't care. And the self-publishing revolution started kicking off. You could actually write a book and put it up on Amazon yourself. You don't have to go through 100 million different, rejection letters from agents that you're querying. You can do it yourself. And it was a very odd path that I got there, but somebody said, you should write a book on how to buy a car. And I'm like, me? So I did. And it was a glorified PDF. I called it, I Never Wore Plaid, Insider Secrets from a Former Car Salesperson. I wrote it under a pen name so I wouldn't have to get permission from the police department, from the chief to do it, because any outside employment, you had to get permission. So I'm just like, well, I'll just bypass that. I'll just write it under a pen name. And lo and behold, it actually sold. The cover sucks. The editing was not the best. And like over 1,000 people bought this book. And I'm like, and it wasn't my mom or her friends or whoever, these are complete strangers shelling out their hard-earned money for my book. And they were actually leaving decent reviews. I mean, some of them weren't great, but some were really good. And I helped a lot of people. So that's how it all kicked off.
So tell us about what your latest project, and fill us in.
The latest project is book number 11. And book number 12. Yeah, is it 12? Yeah, it's 12. And it's Police Stories, The Rookie Years. This book right here. What happened was I wrote a bunch of other books about different stuff. And then I was at a writers' conference. I highly, highly, highly recommend going to writers' conferences. The magic is at the happy hour, meeting people in the hall, just conversations that you have with these people. And what I did, coming up to me, asking me police questions. And it's like, hey, would you need my character is doing this. Would he need a warrant? How long would the DNA take to come back, from the lab? Stuff like that. So I wrote 2 books called Cops and Writers. And it answered a lot of those questions, and that sold really, really well. So I got picked up by a hybrid publishing company, and this latest book is I put it in the introduction. It's like, you know what? No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, people find out you are a cop or you were a cop. And one of the first questions they ask you is, what's the craziest thing you've ever seen? So that's what this book is. Police Stories, The Rookie Years is 34 chapters of 34 different stories from when I was a rookie, just through the eyes of, this naive rookie that doesn't know anything, that's thrust into one of the worst neighborhoods in the country for violent crime.
Oh, wow. So tell us a little bit about your process. Are you an outliner? Are you a pantser? How do you put together your books?
For nonfiction, like what this book is, I don't outline. But what I do is I could be driving to the gym. I could be going to the grocery store or whatever, and I'll remember something that happened to me. And I have different folders in my notes on my phone. So I'm like, oh, yeah, the hot dog story. Okay, yeah, boom. Okay, there it is. So I have it in my head. I kind of know what I want. Then when I start writing, I just let it happen. I've written fiction, and for fiction, I start with a vague outline, or I'm mostly pantsing. But if I get cornered, if I write myself into a corner, or if I get stuck, then I start outlining like a madman. And that usually gets me out of whatever problem.
Well, you obviously help a lot of writers too. Impart your knowledge so that they can make their stories better. We have that in common. But you have a podcast. Why don't you tell us about that, how that came about, and what kind of things you do on your podcast?
Yeah, again, I never would have thought I'd have a podcast. What happened was I wrote those Cops and Writers books, and I started going on podcasts to promote myself. And I'm like, okay, I can do this. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, you know what? I could do this too. Why don't I start a podcast? A couple of people are like, you know what? You got a decent voice. Back in college, my brother was a DJ at the college radio station, and he inevitably, if he had a date with a cute girl or there's a party that he wanted to go to, hey, could you take the board for a couple hours? Sure. So I would DJ. So I'm not like scared or, phased by the microphone and hearing myself, all that kind of good stuff. It's kind of natural. So I thought to myself, well, I'll start a podcast. And before I know it, it just explodes. But it was a lot of hard work. As you guys know, doing a weekly podcast or a bi-weekly podcast or whatever, that's tough. There's a lot of moving parts to it. And I'm like, you know what? I could do this. So I initially started the podcast to promote my own books. And before I know it, I've had really, really good guests on the show, and it's all just word of mouth. I've had Jack Carr on my show. I had a KGB spy. If you ever watch the TV show The Americans,
Yeah.
yeah, it's based on Jack Barsky's life, and he was an advisor for the show, so we became friends. So then, for the polar opposite, I had a CIA officer. He wound up being like the third or fourth highest CIA officer in the country. And, and so I got the American spy and I've got the Russian spy, that kind of thing. And I've had some great writers on the show, and I also have writers that are up and coming. And usually they have something to do with law enforcement. I had Steve Murphy and his partner Javier Pena. Netflix did a special on them. It was called DA Narcos. And they're the ones who took down Pablo Escobar. Now, Steve and I talk on the phone probably once a week. We're best buds. And that never would have happened if it wasn't for the podcast. So
tell our viewers, I'm sorry, tell our viewers where they can find your podcast and where they can find your books and your website.
Well, my website is, I try to keep everything Cops and Writers. So if you Google Cops and Writers, Patrick O'Donnell, you'll find me. The podcast is on all the platforms, Apple, Spotify. I have a YouTube channel. I think it's like 30 different channels I'm on or something like that. Amazon, I don't know. It's a whole bunch. And the website again is copsandwriters.com, and I'm Amazon exclusive for my books for now.
So what are you working on right now? What can we expect from you down the road?
I am currently working on the sequel to Police Story of the Rookie Years. This will be Street Cop to Sergeant. So this is the time that I became an FTO. I'm training cops, and I'm getting ready to promote to sergeant. So that's the next book.
Very fun.
So when you do, let me just ask you this, a process thing. When you do these stories, you obviously change the names to protect the innocent.
Unless the person is deceased. Yeah, unless the person is deceased, or if I get permission from them. And of course, if I'm going to use a real name, they're only going to be in the most positive of lights. I'm not here to break up marriages. I'm not here to get anybody criminally prosecuted. Nothing like that.
Exactly.
Very cool. Well, Patrick, it's been great to have you on. We've got to have you back when your next book comes out.
I'd love that.
Just thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That'll be great.
Fantastic. Thanks for coming on. We really, really, really enjoyed it. And we will do this again. And we need to talk about a couple of other things anyway. You and I need to, about my podcast and your podcast and being on each other's podcast. And we'll set that up. That'll be fun. Yeah. Well, that wraps up this episode of Get to Know here on the Outliers YouTube channel and podcast series. And as you know, we will be back with other interviews and other fun stuff down the road. So until then, keep reading, keep writing, keep having fun, and try not to get caught.
The Outliers podcast is a copyrighted presentation of Outliers Writing University. All rights reserved. Learn more at outlierswritinguniversity.com.